All right. Looks like we still have some folks coming into the room. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. We'll be getting started in just a minute. All right. All right, I have it as 4:01 p.m., which means we need to go ahead and get started because we have a lot of stuff to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and get it going. All right, good afternoon, everybody, or wherever you are. Good morning, good evening. My name is Gene Kesselman, and we're going to get started with some words from MIT's President Reif.
Good afternoon. I'm Rafael Reif, MIT's president, and I'm delighted that you have joined us for this important discussion. Today's program about innovation at the intersection of academia, the military, and industry is appropriately focused on the present and the future, how partnerships are evolving to respond to rapid changes in the innovation landscape. But I hope you will forgive a brief reflection on the past, because this event is about 160 years in the making. MIT's relationship with the military and industry is fundamental. The Institute was founded in 1861 deliberately to accelerate the nation's industrial revolution. And of course, partnership with the private sector remains essential to our capacity for impact. That is well established. Perhaps less well known is that military training has existed at MIT since we admitted our first class in 1865. Since then, more than 12,000 officers have been commissioned from MIT, including more than 150 who have reached the rank of general or admiral. Our tradition of national service has taken many forms, from the launch of the MIT Rad Lab in 1940, to Lincoln Laboratory in 1951, to the new MIT Air Force AI Accelerator. We continue to pursue deeply meaningful opportunities to innovate and keep America safe. The nation's technology and security needs have changed over the years, but the importance of collaboration has not. That is why these issues demand your attention. How do these partnerships function? How are they changing? How can we connect and continue to work together in service to our nation? These issues are more complex than they might appear. Starting in the 1960s and continuing to this day, some have raised serious concerns about MIT's relationship with the military. They've asked questions about funding, ethics, and other important topics that do need careful consideration. We owe it to our entire community to explore those concerns and foster dialogue that is open and honest as we work to ensure that the next phase of engagement is consistent with MIT's values. I look forward to hearing the new ideas that I'm sure will emerge during your conversation. I want to offer my thanks to everyone who helped organize this event, especially MIT ROTC, the Security Studies Program, and the Innovation Initiative. I recently learned that some in our ROTC community feel as if they are a separate appendage, as one person put it, and not seen as part of the broader MIT community. During commencement in a normal year, I look out on Kellyan Court and see a couple of thousand graduating students in their black robes and caps. And then I see our ROTC graduates in their crisp white uniforms, and I cannot help but smile. To our cadets and officers present this afternoon, Let me state clearly that MIT values you, we are proud of you, and we are grateful for your service to our community and our country. Thank you for all you do, for participating today, and I wish you a terrific and rewarding time together.
Thank you, President Reif. I think indeed we will have a terrific time together. I'm very much looking forward to this. All right, well, hello everybody. My name is Gene Kesselman, and I'm truly honored to be here today with all of you, moderating this incredible panel. In a minute, we'll jump into introductions and I'll ask some questions of the panelists. We'll also open it up later to questions from the audience. So if you do have a question, just ask me to wait for a little bit, and then you ask it via the Q&A function. We'll try to get to as many as we can. But first, I want to take a minute to underscore the opportunity that we have here today to have a very open and thought-provoking conversation about innovation and collaboration between the private sector, the military, and universities like MIT. So personally, I'm elated that I can be a part of this event, as this is a passion topic of mine. I've been thinking about or living through the challenges we'll be discussing for most of my career. I've had 21 years of putting on the uniform of the US Air Force and a few more years working in the government innovation in DC, and as well as some startup time. I've been at MIT as a student and now as executive director of the MIT Innovation Initiative. I have unknowingly at times and purposely at others explored this problem area most of my adult life. So this is a really exciting panel for me. In fact, the main reason I applied to MIT for business school was the research that a professor was doing at MIT Sloan around innovation and the public-private partnership. Little did I know that later that professor would eventually become my boss a few years later when Professor Fiona Murray hired me to work at MIT to chip away at this problem with her. I remember thinking if there's any place I could come and have a valuable impact, it would be at MIT. So, and here I am now with you taking part in this valuable and amazing panel. So it has become clear that in recent years, our government and military are actively seeking new models and initiatives to stay competitive and to ensure national security. So it's panels like this that offer us the ability to come together and have impactful discussions that, as President Reif just said, should be appropriately focused on both the present and the future. So hopefully when we're done here, you all will think that we have some more ideas and maybe some actionable and usable ideas for our community to use to make impactful change. I'm going to now introduce our esteemed panel, and if you want, their extended bios will be in the chat. So I'll just do quick introductions and you can all take a look through the chat for their bios. So we'll start with the co-directors of the Air Force's flagship AI research and translation element, the AI Accelerator, truly a one-of-a-kind DoD organization embedded inside a university and a model for academia DoD research partnership. We'll start with Dr. Daniela Roos, who is the MIT director of the Accelerator, as well as professor of electrical engineering and computer science, and the director of CSAIL, the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at MIT, and also deputy dean of research for the Schwarzman College of Computing. Daniela will be joining us very shortly. Colonel Tucker Cinco Hamilton is her military counterpart in this partnership and serves as Air Force Director of the Accelerator. He brings significant and impressive military experience to this role through his many years as a fighter test pilot, instructor, and commander. Welcome, Cinco, and thanks for being with us. We also have Dr. Bernadette Johnson, the Chief Technology Ventures Officer from MIT Lincoln Lab, one of the government's leading federally funded research and development centers. The fact that this position, frankly, even exists at an FFRDC is a great start. And Bernadette is certainly trailblazing in this role. Previously, Bernadette was the Chief Science Officer at DIU Defense Innovation Unit. Welcome, Bernadette. We also have Dr. Jonathan Woodson, the Army Reserve Medical Commanding General, former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs, and Boston University's director of the Institute for Health System Innovation and Policy. That's all the description of one person, by the way. He's a walking Venn diagram of this topic area. Welcome, Jonathan, and thank you for being with us. And of course, we have Eric Schmidt, the co-founder of Schmidt Futures, the former executive chairman and CEO of Google. Eric has been extremely engaged and influential in DoD policy as founding chairman of the Defense Innovation Board and as the current chair of the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. Eric has also been a great friend to many academic institutions, including MIT, and was a visiting innovation fellow here. Eric will be joining us shortly as well. We have a lot of questions, and we'll get to the questions for Eric and Daniela shortly. All right. All the panelists are here to talk about one of the fundamentally important topic areas for the future of our country. How do we accelerate innovation by harnessing the ties between the US, the military, the private sector, and universities like the MIT? As a final note for me, let me just level set quickly to make sure everyone, including the audience, is working with the same language. We're talking about accelerating innovation. So I want to establish what innovation means so that we know what we're actually trying to accelerate. At MIT, we define innovation as the process of taking ideas from inception all the way through to impact. So in the context of this discussion, I would offer that we're talking about how we might accelerate the process of finding ideas across industry, academia, and the DoD, and developing them in order to have meaningful impact on the mission of national security and defense. So I hope that makes sense, that innovation is a process, and that we can agree on this common language, at least for now. I'm happy to also explain the merits of that definition later on in the spirit of open debate, but let's just take that for granted at this point. Okay, let's get going. So I will ask the first few questions, and later on, we'll open it up to the audience. Jonathan, Dr. Adam Grant, an organizational psychologist from Wharton, who was on the DIB with Eric and Daniela, recently testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee and did not mince words. He started his testimony with, "I worry that DoD culture is a threat to national security." I interpret that to mean that something must change with DoD culture for us to even be able to accelerate innovation. You intimately know the challenges of DoD culture at the highest levels. Do you agree with Dr. Grant that DoD's culture is a threat to national security? And if so, can you help us think through how we can change that culture?
Well, thank you very much for having me on the panel and for that question, and it is a profound one. And the way I would begin is that every organization, including higher education, the Department of Defense, is threatened if they do not develop their people to be innovators and to develop a culture of innovation. But it's particularly pressing and problematic at this time in our history because change is accelerating. I mean, just look at the amount of change that we've seen in the last year as a result of COVID, an unforeseen, well, maybe unforeseen pandemic, but a circumstance that changed how we live, work, and play. And so we're faced more and more with these complex or wicked problems. And finding solutions requires a more rapid cycle of innovation to deal with what we say in the military is the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world we live in. And so this is certainly true of national security. So I can't disagree with that description by Dr. Adams. However, trying to address this, we need to understand that we have to develop our people, as I said, as innovators. And, you know, there was this very interesting book written a couple of years ago by David Epstein called Range. And the subtext of that title was Why the Generalist Triumphs in a World of Specialists. And really what he was talking about is the issue of how do you develop people to be innovators, to think differently, to develop a toolkit that brings new strategies to complex problems. And he talks about the individual, he talks about athletes, musicians, academicians who rose to the top of their game in these various disciplines And the majority, of course, had an eclectic beginning. They sampled, if you will, different career paths or different ways of training, different sports before they settled on that specialty that they were in. So these exceptional athletes sampled, and as a result, they built their toolkit. And so in answer to your question, what we've got to do, particularly in the military, is allow for broadening experiences for young officers and enlisted and all of our people to build that eclectic toolkit so that they can be part of teams to develop solutions to the complex environment we're in. Now, this means that we have to break with tradition because we can't stovepipe their career development. It means that we might actually have to accept people into the service who are older and come in with a different experience and join the team in finding solutions to problems. So this is a very important question and very important issue and requires a culture change in the military to meet the needs of the future.
Sorry, I was just taking notes. That's the first time I've ever heard anyone say that we should bring in older people to the military. It brings joy to my heart. But I wonder if you could maybe pull on that a little, if I may pull on that thread a little bit more. Certainly the kind of accelerated use of young people and finding new paths and things like that for them. We're going to talk about that actually a little bit later in the panel. But can you maybe give us a little bit more about what you mean by bringing in older people?
Yeah, sure. So there are people in our society who want to contribute, who have spent time in civil society, again, building that toolkit, understanding how to work in different organizations, think about problem solving, who may come in with special skills. Cyber is one of those, and which they may actually bring a skill set that is very important to add to the team to, again, look at how we develop the solution sets for these very complex problems that we're facing. So what we've got to do is think differently. In many organizations, it's about bringing in younger people, obviously, who think differently and challenge the old guard in the way they solve problems. In the military, because we are often stovepipe and we have these year groups that begin very young and they have to progress from lieutenants to captains and majors. We need to think about how we diversify at the senior ranks to bring in new ways of thinking. Because one of the problems you have in terms of developing an innovative culture is that if you are, if you grow up in a particular organization, in a particular discipline, solving problems in a specific way, you actually get calcified as you get older. You want to solve these new, even more complex problems using the specific ways you've solved problems years ago, and it often doesn't work. And as a result, you need to embrace the diversity of ideas, diversity of the team, bring in people who don't think like you in order to ensure that you're developing that innovative culture. So the whole idea is develop our people with a broader toolkit, but then open up the possibility of others joining our team to make our organization strong.
I love that, by the way. As I said, I haven't heard of that idea before, but it makes a lot of sense to, you bring up young people, they become embedded in the culture. And then some point in the senior ranks, you come in and you shock the culture with somebody new and they bring in new ideas. And that's a really great idea. Thank you for sharing that. Let's see. Cinco, do you have anything else on that topic? I thought maybe you would have something, a perspective on that as well as a senior leader in the military.
Yeah, no, thanks, Gene. I appreciate it. And it's great being with you all. And General Woodson, yeah, I agree with the sentiment for sure. I think ultimately we have a lot to celebrate that's good. There's a lot of military culture that is good, but we need to be able to encourage and allow people to go down paths that are not prescribed And we struggle with that, right? Because of our hierarchy, the people that are our leaders, like in a career field, have been in that career field typically. And so, yeah, the young officers or enlisted members in that pipeline, right, are not always encouraged to jump out because they don't know how to jump back in, because the senior leaders don't know how to necessarily take care of, those individuals. And we really do need, those folks to be able to go do other things, and then to bring that experience back into their career field, or to go to a different career field, or like go into society with that knowledge and, serve in their society, and maybe not in the military. But I do feel like we need to work harder on getting rid of the prescribed path. And this is the way that you need to go in your career and check all these certain boxes.
Yeah, if I could just respond to that for a minute. I think the strongest organizations are the organizations that cultivate these generalists that David Epstein talks about, and matches them with the folks who have these specialty skills. So it really is a balance, but we need to grow more of these folks with an eclectic background. But I want to address one other point that is very I think, notable in what you said, which is that when we give people broadening experiences, meaning we allow them to leave the service and come back, it feels like they're behind. And we need to change that thinking. They're actually not behind. They may actually be ahead, but we don't appreciate it. But because we've had this rigid sort of attitude of year groups and progressive promotion on time, that has stymied, I think, the need to develop more innovative people at the top. So we need to get away from this thought of sort of rigid promotion groups, and then understand the importance of having a broadening experience to the diversity of the organization and the strength of the organization.
Wonderful. Thank you both. And just for admin purposes, real quick, just for our staff here, I was just told that Eric is in the audience, not as a panelist, but as an attendee. So it'd be great if we could invite him up to the stage to talk. If you guys can take a look at that and make sure you promote him up to the stage, because I'm pretty sure we want to hear what he has to say on this topic. So if you guys could take care of that, I appreciate it. All right. Oh, there he is. Hello, Eric. Sorry about
all good.
The confusion. All right. Well, actually, it's perfect timing. We've gone through introductions, and we're just on the part where I ask you a question. So I'll just jump into that.
Okay.
And welcome.
Can you hear me
Yes.
okay?
Yes, great. Thanks a lot. I'm Gene.
Yes, I heard your introduction, Gene. I
perfect.
really admire your service to this. And any opportunity to thank MIT for hosting ROTC and the other programs that MIT does is a great use of my time. It's just wonderful what you all do.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Well, since we're talking, let me go ahead and jump into the question for you. So you ran one of the most innovative and influential companies in the world. We all know Google very well. You've recently launched an effort to create a new field of interdisciplinary research at Broad, connecting biology and machine learning. Eric, you're on too many boards for me to list in this forum, but I'd like to talk for a few minutes about your time with the Defense Innovation Board, if I may, which you chaired, by the way, for 4 years with Ash Carter, who is also one of our MIT Innovation Fellows and works just down the street from us at another school. I have 3 related questions, which I'll give you now all together, and if I'm sure you'll ask me for them again, but I want to pose them all together just for the sake of kind of connecting them. So, Eric, in the 4 years you were with the DIB, what surprised you the most? What recommendation do you think made the biggest impact to date? And what is the one thing that they really ought to do, but it seems hard or impossible for the government to do? And I'll repeat those as much.
No, I understand. I think the biggest accomplishment that we had was helping create the JAKE, and also something called the SWAP study, which was a software study, which influenced the change in the way the military was dealing with software. I think the biggest surprise to me, we collectively visited more than 100 bases, We had tremendous support from the senior leadership at the DoD. The biggest thing that surprised me was how bad the bureaucracy was. So I came to a view that the military was really good people trapped in a really bad bureaucracy. And my model is that the bureaucracy was designed in the 1980s and has not changed. I've since talked to people who were there in the 1980s, and they said the bureaucracy was designed in the 1960s and had not changed. So maybe it's one of those things where the bureaucracy lags 20 to 30 years. And that is an issue of national security at this point. Virtually everything we face as a national security threat will be from issues around new technology of one kind or another, whether it's going to be in space or whether it's going to be through cyber or through traditional war mechanisms amplified by AI tools. So the way I would describe the biggest issue right now goes something like this. All the people I worked with over the last 5 years have been replaced by new people, right? Partly because of career transition, some people have retired, and of course the change of administration. So all the learning and all of the influence that we had has now got to get restarted again. And when you have that kind of situation, you get bureaucratic capture where the bureaucracy is perfectly happy to do what it's always been doing, which is to build large, very expensive programs with a small number of contractors with specifications that are written by the specifiers and not by the developers, not using agile software, in fact, not doing any software at all. And those problems need to be addressed by the new leadership. They're well articulated and they're well understood within the leadership, but they can't change it. So we made at the DIB a series of recommendations, but I think the most profound ones go something like this. The Congress gives the DoD lots of authorities, and the Congress gets mad because the DoD doesn't take the authorities. The contractor base does what they're specified, because if they don't, they get sued. But if you ask the contractors would do something better than what they were told to do. So there's something deeply wrong in that whole cycle. It's anti-innovative. And there are mechanisms, including using various paths through the acquisition process and changing the way software is classified, that would materially and relatively inexpensively improve things. One of the things that I learned about the DoD, I mean, I can go on this for hours, but I'll stop. The DoD has lots of money, right? So there's lots and lots of people, lots and lots of money, but it needs to be spent better.
Sorry, I cannot keep up with all the things you just said of value. Some of that was really, really interesting. I'd like to go back to all of it was very, very interesting. I'm sorry. But something I wanted to pull a little bit on is the very beginning. You said it was the Jake and then the software development recommendations that I believe led to Kessel Run. Is that correct?
Yeah, Kessel Run actually preceded the software development things, and then Kessel Run stimulated us to do the software map. The story with Kessel Run and all of that was that the origin was that we were in Bahrain basically in the Arab world, and we were visiting a base, and they had one of these secure air command centers called a KAOC. And I spoke to the general at the time, who nowadays runs the Air Force Academy. I said, what was his biggest problem? And it turns out it was a whiteboard. And it was a whiteboard that had all the timing around refueling. It's a secret whiteboard. And they used different colors. They had 3 people whose 24 hours a day were job to do this in order to move the refueling around. Now, this is a guy, he's fighting an air war, he's shooting at things. And I saw, we had them actually do a real mission in front of us with, a good outcome and all of that. And this is his number one constraint. This is his number one complaint. And so a small team fixed it. And then everybody said, okay, we see how software can be built differently. And that was the genesis of Kessel Run and then the other things. It turns out that until that, it was against the rules to have your own software team, because software was treated as sort of repair. So it's different color of money, as it's called. And so if you had a software team, you couldn't keep them to make the software better. And so I remember talking to a very, very, very senior 4-star general. And I said, I don't understand why you don't have 50 people who are fixing all the problems. He ran, I don't know, $50 billion worth of stuff. And he said, I'm not allowed to. I tried that and they took it away from me. That's insane. I mean, again, I can go on.
Real quick, on the Jake, you said that was the first thing. So Cinco and I work, and Danielle, I'm sorry, all three of us work with the AIA, the AI Accelerator at MIT, and work very closely with the Jake, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Do you think there was something about AI that made it possible to stand up the Jake right now in this time, in this place, that is different than all the other technologies and all the other kind of areas of interest for the DoD? Is AI kind of in its own special category right now?
Well, I wish I could tell you that it was treated specially, but in fact, it was not. The Jake proposal was actually killed through what is called the POM process twice. And we had to fight internally against the bureaucrats to get it funded. And I should say that Daniela made a very significant contribution to the DIB in her contributions there. So thank you, Daniela, for everything you've done and continue to do. So the lesson I learned is that if you want to make a change in a bureaucracy that's $700 billion in dollars and 3 million in people with God knows how many contractors and all the Congress and so forth, it's a real fight. It takes us fighting, it takes the Secretary of Defense fighting for it and so forth. It does happen. To give you an idea of how bad the situation is, the POM process, you make a proposal now for money that will be approved for you in 2 years. Now that's the definition of rapid development, right? That's a joke, by the way. And we studied the length of time of the large programs in the DoD. Every new weapon system has taken 2 years longer than the previous one. And of course, the cost overruns are well understood. So another example is, let's look at the F-35. F-35 is a magical airplane. The whole system is going to cost $1 trillion over its lifetime. So it's a very big program. There was a concern that they did not have enough computing horsepower. And it turns out that part of the reason is that the computing horsepower was specified in 2001 when the program was agreed to. Now, this is being addressed, but you see my point. We still have VAX chip architectures powering the B-22, the B-2, I think, and a couple of other things. So if you're not willing to change the CPU of something which is going to last for 50 years, you're going to end up with a really old computer in a really impressive piece of airplane. I'm using that as an example.
I don't know if you ever got a chance to go on tour of the nuclear launch facilities, but if you really want to see some old equipment, if you haven't seen a floppy drive in a while, I suggest you go to the fields of Wyoming and take a look.
In fact, we actually worked on that. And it turns out that part of the reason that our nuclear base is so secure is that no one is alive who knows how to hack the analog systems and the 8-inch floppies that they use. There is a proposal to modernize that, which will cost $100 billion.
We can talk about that for a long time as well, but let's move on. Let's talk about the AIA for a second. Danielle and Cinco. The common phrase we use when we are talking about changing the DoD is turning the aircraft carrier. But it seems to me that that implies that there's just one captain of this aircraft carrier we're all on, and that he or she has given us an order to turn the ship, and everyone is turning with it. I hope we can all agree that that is not the way the DoD changes, nor is it how any large organization changes, including MIT. So you are co-directors of an organization that we have seen is starting to be a catalyst for change. I see it, I'm biased clearly, but I see it as a model for technology translation for the entire DoD, not just the Air Force. So Daniela, can you tell us more about the AI Accelerator and why, from the university perspective, this type of model was something MIT found so exciting? And what could the Air Force do better as a partner to you?
Thank you, Jean, for this question. We are so excited to work with the Air Force and to innovate on how we achieve advancements in AI and how we translate those advancements in AI. So we've been thinking about this model for some time. In fact, from way before the AI Accelerator was funded and started. And the observation is the following. So in order to deploy AI solutions today, we need the AI algorithm, we need the domain data used by the algorithm, we need the computation infrastructure, and we need the domain knowledge to understand what problems need to be solved, what resources are available, and how to make a useful product. And so these are the ingredients of the recipe that we wanted to create in order to launch the AI Accelerator. And the AI Accelerator was started in 2019. It was a partnership with the objective to speed up the development of science and the path from research to innovation and the path to domain relevant products, where the domain includes anything that the Air Force is interested in. And so the partnership is between MIT campus, MIT Lincoln Lab, and the Air Force. And in the AI Accelerator program, we have these interdisciplinary teams with experts in technical aspects of AI from MIT. We have domain experts from the Air Force, and then we have experts from MIT Lincoln Lab who understand both AI and the domain. And so we thought that by bringing these three stakeholders together, we would achieve both basic discovery in AI and a rapid translation from the university to products. And in this program, we're developing the AI data and computation architecture framework, and we're looking at both technical and legal aspects of these problems. We want to accelerate the science advances and the adoption of AI in the DoD. And the campus researchers advance the knowledge, the Lincoln Lab researchers and the airmen understand and contribute to the state of the art and the domain needs. And then the idea is that Lincoln Lab and Air Force participants can take the latest advancements that they now understand and know about and turn them into useful products. And so I think we have a very fruitful collaboration, and the collaboration contributes to science and knowledge, and it also contributes to new paths for rapidly developing new tools and innovation for the Air Force. And it's a very exciting area. We believe that through this program, we have the potential to support a number of national and international security initiatives, and we can go beyond AI to other aspects of technology, other new technologies. And the last thing I want to say is that since we started the AI Accelerator program, we also realized that there was a critical need to teach AI, to train broadly the Air Force and more generally the DoD in AI beyond the airmen who are with us around the clock. And so we launched a 12th project, as we call it, and the focus of this project is on education research and on developing programs that allow us to train the DoD members in AI at different levels, depending on the role they have within the DoD, whether they're leaders, whether they are users of AI or deployers of AI. Everyone needs to know some of the same things, but some different things. And so the opportunity to do all of this under one roof, under one program is very exciting. And so far, we've been very productive, and we've had a very wonderful collaboration thanks to the leadership of Cinco and to Laz Gordon, who preceded him.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing model. I think you're right. It can apply to many other disciplines other than AI. But I do want to ask you, I know as Cinco is a pretty much a flawless leader, as was Laz, but what can the Air Force, what can they do better? What is it that we still need to work on from the military side of the house to make us a better partner for MIT?
Well, Eric outlined a number of important areas of improvement. From our point of view, I think that more agility in how things are done in the Air Force will go a long way. I think that there is, we're beginning to see a change of culture, but we still need to work on the acceleration part of the AI program to, and that can only happen if we have a meeting of the minds on the technology side, but also on the translation side. And if we have processes within the Air Force, within the DoD that are receptive to this translation. And so these processes could include the funding that is needed for doing the startups with relevant products, for taking the new knowledge that is being discovered and generated and turning that into specific products, specific services that the Air Force can benefit from.
Great, thank you. I do believe the translation is the key to success in all of this. I think that's certainly the valley that we all need to work on. All right, Cinco, from your side, the AIA is taking the ideas out of MIT and trying to connect them directly to the Air Force's mission. What are the major hurdles you see for adopting the technologies and capabilities into the Air Force that come out of the AIA? And on the flip side, the same question I asked Daniela, how can MIT be an even better partner, or how can academia be a better partner to the Air Force?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Gene. And thanks, Dr. Roos, for the partnership and leading us off there, explaining what we are. And it's been a very unique partnership and very rewarding for myself and the airmen involved. And I think ultimately for the Department of the Air Force. Listen, it's kind of simple. It's not simple to do, but it's just the idea. If we want to bring AI into the DoD, we need to educate people on what AI is. Right. And that is, I think, the biggest hurdle is people don't understand the technology. They don't understand how to implement and acquire the technology, because AI is not just the typical system, right? It's not the autonomous swarm UAV or the F-35 or, a certain software program. It is a part of lots of systems and lots of programs. And so just the basic understanding of what AI is what I think we're lacking. And that's what we're going after through our Project 12. And I know senior leaders in the Air Force, the department, are very keen on trying to solve that as quickly as possible, is get people spun up so that they understand what it is. And that goes from our senior leaders all the way down to our airmen. I mean, our senior leaders started, their high school life on typewriters, right? And I was similar on like a typewriter word processor. And the young students, young adults, and our young airmen, guardians, officers, right? They grew up in a different world with different technology. And so we need to try to bridge that gap, and we need to give them the tools in order to do that. So I think step one is really educating the force on what artificial intelligence is and how it can be applied. AI is not just something we educate, but we have to work on how do we transition the technology, right? So it's not as simple as now, okay, everyone knows what AI is, but how do we actually get it into, airmen's hands? How do we legally do it? How do we ethically do it? And that's a part of our projects here at the AI Accelerator, is trying to figure that out, right? We're developing capability with MIT. Our airmen are getting really smart. The MIT professors, the PIs, and the Lincoln Lab folks are very gracious with their time and bringing our folks along. And then we're trying to really bridge that gap and go after, like, all right, program offices. This is what we need to do contractually and legally. This is how we're going to have to share data. This is where we're going to have to put data. And that whole like foundational aspect of AI is what we most desperately, I think, need to get after in the Air Force. And then to your second question, you know, MIT has been a wonderful partner. And I think it's tough when you have researchers at heart, right? Like they don't always know how to transition some of the technology. You know, I think, and I'm not just talking about MIT, just in general, and, you know, the Air Force Research Lab can kind of fall into this bucket a little bit too, where they do amazing research, but then how do you actually take it and say, all right, we have an MVP now, we need to actually get this into the program office instead of just doing more research, right? And trying to get to that next level. And so I think we in general need to recognize when something is good enough and really try to work hard to cut that, you know, get it to the level it needs to be, the TRL that we need it at, and then get it over to an organization. Maybe that's industry, maybe that's an FFRDC, you know, to units, organizations in the DoD, and actually get it into the hands of the warfighter.
Cinco, can I add something to that wonderful summary? I would just say that the airmen who are embedded in the research projects are extraordinary at seeing the opportunities. And so they understand the technology and then they suggest and sometimes the technology is far out, right? I mean, it's not quite ready, but then they can see angles where we could use the technology immediately today. And so, for instance, we have a project we call Guardian, where the objective is to create an intelligent assistant, a friend or guardian of sorts for the pilot. And so we're building this Guardian, and at some point, one of the airmen said, "This would be a great idea for training, for coaching, for improving." Well, we didn't think about that angle when we started the project, but through these really close interactions, we found an opportunity that is ready, that is available, that is immediate. And so now we just need for someone to take the research and turn it into that extraordinary pilot training program.
Fantastic. Go ahead, Cinco.
Oh, gee, I mean, I'd love to get on a 30-second soapbox if I can. And it really comes down to, I think our society like really has to get after how we bring in this technology, right? But that is going to require a mentality of taking down those silos, right? Academia, military, and industry, and learning to collaborate more effectively together. Like, we have to have our boundaries, of course, but we need to be able to work together. And Daniela, I think that was a wonderful example, because I think because of our partnership, because we're sitting here together, we're able to see those points and go after certain things that you guys wouldn't have recognized. And so I really want to hit home that point, because I think that is one way that we're really going to be able to get after, you know, this gap that we have.
Yeah, I remember when Laz came and told me that he was going to embed an active duty unit at MIT. I thought he was kidding at the beginning, and then I was like, this is going to be both an AI experiment and a sociology experiment. This is going to be culture clashing at its best. And to what Jonathan was saying earlier, maybe that's how you also change the culture, is you force that, you do that culture shock that you mentioned, Jonathan, is you force all these parties together and you see what happens. It's been fun to watch and be a part of. So thank you both for that discussion. Bernadette, I've come to the completely unoriginal but crucial determination that the key to success in government innovation is simple. Everyone should just do what they do best, which in the government's case, I believe, is providing hard mission problems and then funding the smartest people to solve them. That's it. That's how simple it is. You work at a federally funded research and development center affiliated with the university, MIT, but you're in a venture role. Can you explain that seeming paradox? What should an FFRDC have to do with creating ventures? And how does this relate to the universities and DoD? It doesn't make sense.
Well, first, thanks, Jean, for the question. Let me suggest a more expansive definition of ventures, right? A typical general definition would be undertaking an undertaking involving risk with some hope of a payoff or some hope to benefit, right? So that's what we set up here, and we're scientists, so we're used to taking risks. I think the idea of doing this within an FFRDC, while it may seem unusual or paradoxical, it isn't really. It is at the core of what the FFRDCs were established to do. So walk back in history a little, as Raphael did. The FFRDCs were established after World War II with the express purpose of being able to tap into that wealth of research in universities and private sector that had helped support the war effort. The idea was to continue these, but in some way to not encumber them quite so much as government employees. And so they were set up with two main objectives. The first objective was to maintain a long-term technical competency in areas where the government couldn't rely on its own in-house laboratories or contractors. And the second was to develop technology and transfer it to the private sector. So those are really very bound up with the definition of what an FFRDC is. The R&D FFRDCs, many of them are run by universities, as Lincoln Laboratory is, and we benefit in multiple ways from that. I think you just heard Daniela and Cinco talk about one with the context of the Air Force Accelerator. So that is an example of fundamental or foundational research being conducted in the university, prototypes, if you will, informed by user needs being developed at an FFRDC, in this case, Lincoln, and then hopefully those transition operationally. Now, at Lincoln, we develop prototypes. I've said that a few times, and it's important to keep in mind. We don't build things if someone else can. We do a really good job of transitioning that technology at the request of our government sponsors, typically to the defense industry base. What we're working on is doing a better job at actually transferring that technology to the private sector. And therein comes the venture. So I'm answering your question in a very long-winded way to say it makes sense. It's part of our DNA, it's part of our mission. It's the part we need to work a little bit harder at, is this actual engagement with the commercial sector, not just to push our technology out, but also to get their advanced capabilities in to help us solve the hard R&D problems that we're tackling.
So how do you get their capabilities in? And in general, if we step back kind of to the broader venture definition, because you did spend a few of those early years with DIU, working alone with Mike in that office, trying to figure out what is DIU going to do in Boston. So you really do have a very good view of kind of the broad spectrum of definition of ventures. But what role should the government take in ventures, in both your capacity and just in a much larger general capacity?
Well, I think, let's say parochially in this smaller capacity at an FFRDC, I think it's important that we recognize that there are seriously advanced capabilities out there in the private sector. Those same graduates that we did not hire went off to start up companies. We can get them to work for us for national security. I think that's a recognition that we have to face. Second, we need to make it easier for them to work with us. So when I say help us, we can put them on research subcontracts. We can try some things like DIU pioneered the commercial solutions opening, a bad habit, which I migrated out to Lincoln Laboratory, I'll say. And that gets people aware of the kind of DoD problems that are out there, for which they also have solutions, but might not have ever heard of the problem space. I think the answer to the larger question of should the government be involved in ventures, the government's been doing it for a very long time, just perhaps not always intentionally, right? I mean, you don't have to look beyond GPS and the internet and search engines and so forth to look back at the provenance in DoD investments. But to make it purposeful instead of collateral, I think does take a little bit of thought. And we've seen things like InQtel, actual venture funding arms of the intelligence community, the Army, Venture Capital Fund, and the newer National Security Innovation Capital Fund. Those are attempts at seeding investments in companies that could, in fact, then serve the greater national security missions. I think what we have to do is make sure, if we go that route, that we're not thinking like a typical venture fund manager might be. You know, if a VC invests in a company, the goal is to raise the valuation of that company to the point where either it gets acquired or goes public, and then get rid of it. I mean, that's when the money is made, right? So they're not necessarily looking for what the government's looking for, which would be sustained, decades-long relationships, ensuring that companies have technical capabilities that will continue to serve the DoD needs. So there's a very different mindset and a different return on investment that I think the government has to be mindful of as it considers moving into this venture world. But there's absolutely room to support small businesses in this way so that they can, in fact, support the greater mission. And I will point out US economic global competitiveness and social well-being and all the other things that we hope to get out of these investments.
Erica, I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't ask your opinion on kind of that government involvement with venture role. I mean, I feel like we could probably have another panel just on the topic of the government seed programs, SBIR, STTR. But generally speaking, the government as a funder, any experience from the DIB recommendations or thoughts on that?
Well, Bernadette really did help invent a mechanism, and the problem is it's not being used very much. So every day I get 2 or 3 calls a day from somebody in the tech industry who is frustrated dealing with the government. They have something which the government could clearly use, but they're not in the right program. They don't have the right sponsor. Their sponsor changed. So the valley of death between the technical companies and their customer, which by definition is a national security company, the national security industry, is very, very deep. And so the solution is the things that she spoke about, but also saying that it is one of the objectives is to buy new stuff. What has happened is that the procurement process has a whole university around procurement. They're all, you know, there was a joke inside that the procurement rules were so difficult that they were going to use IBM Watson to explain the procurement rules to the users of it. I mean, it's insane. But the important thing is have an active program with money that's looking for technology that will advance innovation in the military. The way the military is currently structured, the innovation is not going to occur among government employees. It will be done by the private sector working collaboratively with the government employees. There are other issues. For example, my favorite example is the LCS. So the Littoral combat ship was designed in the late 90s under the theory that we would have ships close to shore. And of course, today we don't want that because the range of land to sea missiles is much greater. And yet we're still building them. And all the people who made all the faulty assumptions about it have all left the service. So there's no one to hold responsible. So the problem here is you've got the life cycles are too long. You can't hold someone responsible and so forth. The best model is the Lockheed Skunk Works model, which the Air Force still talks about, even though it was 50 years ago, where basically they had a colonel level person who had discretion to try this, try that, and so forth. And it was very innovative. So we could put those things in place if we were willing to annoy the procurement structure and employ the large and annoy the large companies. Another idea that I like a lot, which again, the Air Force was pioneering for a while, and I think is still working on, is the concept of digital design studios and digital twinning. Yeah. What you do is you basically say, so the way I would say it is my own proposal is, let's imagine that MIT has a spin out of 100 people and the military uses them to design one of something important. And the rule is that that team can only build one of them. And the intellectual property is owned by the government. And then that intellectual property from the one that works is used to contract a competitive bid to the majors. And during that design period, the normal rules are Silicon Valley rules, which are rapid iteration, try-set. But once you've got one that works, you can't go and build a huge business at it. So you don't have a conflict of interest. The intellectual property is owned by the government. One of the things that's a problem in the current design is that the vendors own the intellectual property. And so an example would be that using AI, you'd want to interconnect all the systems. So for example, you'd want to connect the Aegis destroyer, with the battleship and with the, aircraft carrier in a complicated way. You don't have access to the protocols and the software and the tools because all the vendors are different. That's got to get fixed.
I'll put a plug right now for someone to throw a question in about digital twinning, because I think that's a fascinating topic. I would love to.
Yeah, by the way,
go down.
There is a very large MIT program in this area that's really good, in case you're not familiar with it.
Indeed. I'm trying to hold back all the questions, so I'm going to run more through my script of questions rather than diverge. But I have one more question, and then I want to open it up to the audience. And this question kind of is really maybe one of the heart of why we're here in this panel. It's to talk about the human capital part of it. Jonathan, you've talked about it. Eric, you talked about the fact that one of the great problems in the government is the turnover and the churn, certainly in the DoD. And this talks about another part, the young talent. So let me ask this question for the group, and Jonathan, if you may, if I can, I'll ask you to start off once I ask the question, and then we'll open it up to anyone else that wants to talk. So in a recent Foreign Affairs article entitled America's Military Risks Losing Its Edge, Michelle Flournoy says, and I quote, "The final obstacle is the shortage of technology talent across the Defense Department's workforce, both civilian and military, a digital readiness crisis," in the words of a March 2020 report by the Defense Innovation Board. Later, she goes on to say that the Pentagon should assess its talent needs across its innovation network and throughout the product lifecycle and start fully using the hiring authorities it has, while also creating new career paths for STEM graduates and the service academies and ROTC. So here at MIT, we have heard from our ROTC cadets on campus that they fear their hard work, and these are the best and the brightest. Their hard work and talents will not be put to good use by the military. That they would like to see new alternative career paths. So Jonathan, if I may ask you first, how do we fix this? How do we retain our best and brightest, the ROTC, MIT, BU, ROTC cadets that are coming up to accelerate innovation inside the DoD?
Yeah, that's a great and a very important question. And I tried to get at that before by saying that we've got to rethink in the military the career paths and create on-ramps and off-ramps for different talent pools. So we got to have a much more sophisticated talent management strategy that just doesn't adhere to the decades-old issue of someone comes in at age 21 and is put in a year group and must progress in the ranks with some rather routine assignments in order to have a 20-year career. What Michelle Flournoy is addressing, and I agree with her 100%, is that this is a new world with a lot of dynamic challenges which require a lot of different skill sets, cyber being one, that we've got to look at where the talent is and address the acquisition of that talent by whatever mechanism possible. So in some cases, it may be helping to grow very young talent and bring them up, bring them in, and then give them an appropriate career path that uses that talent. But it also may be, as I said before, individuals that are out there that, I don't know, superb hackers or coders or whatever it might be, and be able to bring them in at a different level, a different age, 35 or whatever it might be, and then allow them to be assessed and join the team and be used effectively. So, the bottom line of what I'm saying is that we really do need to think a whole different strategy for human talent management. The rigid systems of the old won't work for creating an innovative culture.
Yeah.
Sorry, unmuting. Anyone else? Cinco, anything?
And let me give you, Gene, a simple story. we're at the National Security Agency in a secret briefing, and it's on Russian cyber activities. You can imagine what the subject is. So we have a young man who seems quite young, who's brilliant briefer, explaining exactly technically what's going on. And we said, what are your concerns? And he said, well, next month I'm being rotated out of cyber. And I said, what are you going to do? And he said, I don't know. I thought it might be like guard duty or something. And I there's nothing you can say to the idiocy of that. Here you've got a guy who's a real asset to our country, and you're rotating him into something that's not very important for his specialized skills. You wonder, I was looking at the retention in the military, and the majority of people get commissioned, they go in and they serve their initial term and they do it very well, and then they leave. And the conventional system, belief is they leave because of money. Everyone I've spoken said is it's not about money. It's about that they're not working on what they should be working on. So if you want to get innovation, you could start by having an innovation track where the people who would there's this logic that you need general purpose officers. Well, do we think that all the doctors should be turned into cyber people and then they should be turned into military guards? No, the doctors and the nurses are on a specialized track. Right, if you're a military doctor, you're not shunted off not being a doctor. They spend a lot of money to get you to be a really great doctor, and you serve your country well. So there's a lack of understanding of how innovation works. And because the system was designed 50 years ago and has not been changed, and is apparently, as best I can tell, impenetrable and unchangeable. And there are people who are in charge of the system, and when you ask them this question, they say, I do not have the authority to do what you're proposing. So again, I appreciate your simple model of getting the right people to do the right things. They are being prevented from doing that by the HR system in the military, which needs some rethinking.
Go ahead, Daniela.
If I can add to that, I would just say that people want to make a difference. People want to have their time count. And so that translates to thinking about how you give opportunity to people to work on important problems or on problems that they find important. And then how do you give them the tools to tackle these important problems? Sometimes we need new training programs. Sometimes we need new kinds of software or hardware. But ultimately investing in people and making sure that they have the tools to maximize their time, and they have the excitement and the passion to work on the problems that they're asked to work on is important.
Indeed. And anyone else on the topic of retaining our ROTC and young talent? I guess, Eric, to your point, I mean, I wrote in huge letters here, innovation track. I would probably guess that, and Cinco and Jonathan can back me up, every single person in the military either has gone through or knows somebody that has gone through that they have left early or their career has been damaged because they made a decision that took them off what was known as kind of the career path. That, you know, we're telling you to go this way. This is the way you become successful here. And because they do something wrong, they don't get to continue being promoted. And that pressure is what makes someone leave a job where they're incredibly important, or makes someone move someone from a job where they're incredibly important and useful to a job where they're not, because that is the career path that they need to go on to continue being promoted. It is certainly one of the huge errors in our system.
And Gene, let me just add that tech companies have a technical career path where the most senior individual technical contributor can become a vice president or a senior vice president. They're often called fellows or things like this. And it is a parallel track. And it's recognized that their skills are very specialized and they're really likely to be terrible managers. Right? Different track.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, again, this is the issue of, if you want to build an innovative culture, you've got to develop the new mindset that people who take an alternate path they shouldn't be considered as being behind in their experience, but you need to give credit to that alternate experience that increases the diversity of the skill set for your organization. And so that rigid mindset of locking people into a year group for promotion is an anachronistic system that needs to be reevaluated when you want to create a diverse talent pool.
Wonderful. Well, we have only about 20 minutes left. I don't want to monopolize all your time, although I wish I could. I would like to go to the Q&A. We have 18 open questions. I don't think we're going to get to all of them. I did notice that Fiona, who I mentioned earlier, my boss, put something in Q&A, so I'm pretty sure I'm contractually obligated to read it, or at the cost of my job. So Fiona says, not a question, but a note that MITII are about to release a case study on Kessel Run, written by Phil Budden and Fiona, and our MBA student, Isaac Rahman for MIT, and Nick Settenberg and Dylan Brown from DOD. So there's a link there if anyone wants to read that Kessel Run case study. Great. So let's see. I think Rishi, who is our partner from the ROTC program, had a question. I think this will be for you, Danielle and Bernadette. I think this talks to the relationship between MIT, Lincoln Lab, and the military. So as an institution, MIT is very supportive and aware of our partnership through Lincoln Lab, the Air Force AI Accelerator, and its support of the ROTC programs. But within the MIT community, I think, across PIs and the students and the faculty, people are largely unaware of this relationship even exists. How does MIT improve communication about this mutually beneficial partnership, and to sustainably reconcile any differences in MIT's role as a vital DoD partner?
So let's see. I am not sure that that there is not there's not enough awareness. Of course, you can always have more awareness, but I will tell you that the Air Force Accelerator program has about 150 participants from across MIT and Lincoln Lab. And these participants cover a number of PIs, a number of faculty that come from all over campus. And so each of those faculty have research groups. And so like, if you think about the footprint of the program, it covers a lot of schools, it covers all the schools, it covers many departments, and it covers many individual faculty groups within those departments. So of course we can do better, and having programs that bring awareness to the community, like this panel, and other programs would be fantastic. I think that we have the ROTC program is well connected with our undergraduate Europe program. And so we have opportunities for the students to join faculty research groups and work with them on topics that really address their interests and their needs. I will say that in my own experience, I've actually had students come to me, and I've had some extraordinary students who joined my research group with great optimism and great desire to make a difference, and great work ethic.
So let me pick up a little bit on that comment also, because I do still hear this from people. I meet them and say, what, you're an FFRDC, you're part of MIT, what's going on? So we're a little bit disadvantaged because we're geographically not proximal to campus. We're out in Lexington, Massachusetts. And I think that drive has, tended to make us unseen, basically. We also do have citizenship requirements for working at the laboratory. So that means that the roughly 50% of engineering physics graduate students don't even qualify to work out at Lincoln Laboratory that currently reside at MIT and other universities. What we do to try to strengthen the bond, we have a couple hundred summer students come to us every summer, many from MIT, but also other universities. We do have UROP students and we do have graduate students who do their entire PhD work out at the lab. We also have folks with joint faculty appointments doing teaching. And a few years ago, I guess it's been almost 10 or close to it, we set up Beaverworks, which is an environment on campus for project-based learning where DoD-funded problems are given to students to solve. So the awareness is growing, but I do, I get it myself, even when I'm talking to people who've been at MIT forever, and I'll say something about, the size of the research budget at the laboratory, and they're astonished, or the fact that we even work together in areas like, not only AI, but synthetic biology and quantum computing. This is often a bit of a surprise to folks. So I'm open to suggestions for how to improve it.
Perfect. Rishi, now you have Bernadette's email. I'll send it to you and can send her suggestions for what we think we should do next. Cinco, you mentioned to me that you had a quick question.
Yeah, thanks, Gene. This is for Dr. Schmidt. Sir, I've really, appreciate your leadership in many facets of our department and our nation, of course. I had a question though about the culture and industry. We've talked about academia culture and military culture, and there's a lot of challenges that we face. But as a leader in industry, what's your perspective on how that culture is? Like what needs to be changed there? Is there the collaborative mindset? Is there hesitancy to do anything with the government? Are people like disconnected from the realities of us needing to work together? And I'm just, curious your perspective on that.
Well, Colonel, I think the first thing I would say is that the industry that I'm part of operates now on this incredibly fast product cycle. Everything is sped up. If you design a chip, you get one tape out and it works. In software, I was looking at the rate at which my software on my computer upgrades now, and it's every other day, right? So imagine if you had those kinds of requirements put on a military, national security, or an intelligence system. They would break in a second. And so, so the operating culture is different. The general political view is somewhat anti-military for all sorts of historic reasons, which a lot of us are trying to break. And I think what's now clear is that there's plenty of companies that want to work with their national defense counterparts. And why do they want to do it? They're patriots, or they want to make money, or both, right? But there's lots and lots of evidence now, and there are private companies that are forming incubators, venture funds to try to fund these kinds of companies. Even Google, who famously walked away from Maven, is now working hard to get back into the military. And of course, Microsoft and Amazon never left. So I think the good news is we're through that, oh my God, we can't work with the military. And now we're in the, how do we work with the military?
Thank you.
Great. We have some really interesting questions here. I'm trying to get through them all and go quickly here. So maybe we can do these questions maybe in speed round fashion so we can get to as many as we can. So Warren Katz is here, a good friend of all of ours here at MIT and an alum. He said, DoD make-buy acquisition decisions inappropriately, DoD's make-buy acquisition decisions inappropriately skewed towards make for many reasons. Had the DIB considered any incentive structure changes which would skew those decisions more towards buy from private industry? And I know Daniela and Eric, you were both on the DIB. Maybe you could take that question.
Daniela?
After you, Eric.
Yeah, I think we view this not in exactly the way the questioner asked. I think what we basically said is that the military is going to be dependent on the private sector and has to be able to work with it. It's pretty clear that the government itself has almost no software assets and no sort of technology development assets directly. There are some very good people coming out of the academies, like the Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy, and so forth. But they get lost into the system. So one thing that the military could do is it could sort of do a call for people who can code and then aggregate them together and make some progress. But if they don't do that, they're completely dependent on outsiders. One of the arguments we made was that the software people can be acquired because there's a mechanism whose name I've forgotten, where you can hire an individual as a person as though they're a company. So you hire the service, you pay the person's company, and then it's like a contract, and that's possible, and that's a way of getting software people as well.
Well, I would just like to add to that by going back to Cinco's comments earlier on about the importance of education and the importance of empowering people with tools and with skills. And in fact, the DIB did write some reports about the future workforce and what is needed to empower the current DoD members. And so that doesn't go towards buy, but that expands the footprint of what is available from within.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Here's an interesting question. So good afternoon. This is from Michael Noska. Good afternoon to all the panelists in attendance. In light of the recent events, such as the SolarWinds hack of federal government agencies and private sector IT and telecom companies, which have state-of-the-art cybersecurity, my question is whether the trend of autonomous cars, smart cities, smart grids, industrial and military control systems, and critical infrastructures being connected to the internet as physical systems could become a Trojan horse to national security. I mean, that's a big question. Maybe Bernadette or Eric, Cinco, Daniela.
I'll be happy to make a comment here. I think what you've done is, or what the questioner, Michael, has really focused on is that national security is a lot broader than missiles, countries pointing missiles at us, right? I mean, we have vulnerabilities to critical infrastructure that really do need to be protected. And in another way of looking at it might be, it also resolves perhaps one of the issues we just talked about, which is reluctance in some parts of the commercial sector to engage with the government on national security. I think the more that we all understand that national security is broadly defined, the more we appreciate that we're actually all invested in working on these problems. So rather than view it as those as Trojan horses or particular vulnerabilities, those are other problems to solve and a consistent mission set across the DoD to civilian spectrum.
Eric, did you want to say something? I saw you on mute.
I think the questioner poses the question correctly, which is, we're all going to be interconnected, and doesn't that create an enormous vulnerability? And the answer is yes, which is why we need to do it properly. The vast majority of government systems are down rev. The vast majority of operating systems on their computers are 10, 15 years old, which means they're full of bugs. I'm assuming that in the unclassified area, our opponents have the majority of the information that they've stolen over a while. I'm not saying that about the secure networks, which are handled differently. And so in order to live in an interconnected world, you're going to have to change the way you get them built so that they're maintained at the state of the art. And you're furthermore going to have red teams whose job are to make sure that you understand any new vulnerabilities and zero-day exploits. Unless you do that, you'll be in trouble. So the questioner is correct.
Muted. There's a bunch of questions coming in. I'm trying to get through them all. So, and I apologize to everyone. We will not be able to get through all of these. Let's see. There was one really good one up here. Where is it? Let's just go with this one I like. And I will say I'm extremely excited about this announcement as well. So those of you that know, DIU head Mike Brown has been nominated to be the U.S. I think the Pentagon's acquisition and sustainment head under the OSD. What changes would you like him to bring from the innovation community. So for those that don't know, Mike Brown is the current director of DIU, former CEO of Symantec, really brings an enormous variance of perspective and it really has done an amazing job at changing the culture as well inside the DoD. So does anyone want to take this question? Bernadette, I know you know Mike well, and generally speaking, what would you like for him to do in the first 100 days, let's say, of his administration?
So I think it's a great selection, and Michael can bring a lot to the A&S side of the house, but perhaps one of the most important things is he could provide a bridge to the R&E side of the house. So they bifurcated a few years ago, and now we have DIU, management at the federal laboratories, DARPA, those folks all over in research and engineering. Acquisition and sustainment is a parallel entity with very few real bridges had been built across it, to be honest. So that is one thing that's possible. I think it's also likely that he will promulgate some of the things that he's already talked about, which is a greater engagement with the private sector in supporting national security problems, and perhaps contributing to continued streamlining of the acquisition systems and the reforms that were set up 2 administrations ago.
Great, thank you. I'm going to keep going quickly. We only have 4 minutes left. Jonathan, Ben, who is here at MIT, asks, how can the DoD better leverage service members who come to MIT for graduate study, something you must know a lot about? It seems that many return to the roles that do not leverage what they learn or support them to effective change.
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, it gets back to some of the heart of the things I was saying about a totally new strategy for talent management. We do need to, again, allow service members to go outside of the military system to get these broadening experiences, which build their toolkit. But then once they get them, we shouldn't shunt them back into these rigid career paths that don't use their talent. And so one of the biggest challenges we have today is thinking about a new talent management strategy that allows for young mid-career folks to use those special abilities that they've acquired on projects that they are enthusiastic about and will support, again, innovation within the system.
Daniela, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's talent management is very important. So you send somebody to MIT, they learn a lot of important technical skills. It's really important for them to have a path to use those skills rather than sit in an office and move paper around or do something that is not tied to their skills. So I agree with Jonathan, figuring out ways to manage the talents, to assign people according to what they're passionate about, what they know how to do. And there are plenty of problems that need to be solved, right? I mean, through the Ai Accelerator program, we develop technologies that have to be picked up by people outside of the university. And there are so many opportunities around how you take those ideas and you turn them into capabilities that are relevant for your unit, for your service organization, for the nation. And so I think that there is a lot of opportunity, but there has to be a different layer of management to match those who can solve the problems to the problems that need to be solved.
Wonderful. Thank you both. All right, this is the last question. I'm going to make it really quick, even though I think this is something we don't talk a lot about, and that's the difference between the DoD and the intelligence community. And I, having spent most of my career inside the IC, this is something that I really do believe is worth thinking and talking about. So TJ Lincoln, who was at the in a row with me, asks, we've heard a lot today about DoD. Do you think the intelligence community is farther ahead of the DoD in being innovative because there's more collegial atmosphere, it's not as rigid in terms of rank hierarchies up or out of promotions, and the fact that there tends to be closer integration with industry and academia? For one, I remember Bill Gates coming through our operations center at the NRO. Eric, you just said that you were able to get some classified briefings as well. Do you think that that's true, that the intelligence community, maybe Bernadette as well, is a little bit different?
I just visited with the intelligence community on some other matters on the AI commission that we did. And I think some of what was said was true. However, the intelligence community itself is splintered among, I think, 17 or 18 agencies. And the collaboration between them is quite poor from what I've been told, and I think is true. The systems and methods, the way the platforms work are not the same. It's quite obvious that if you have an intelligence community, they should all be working on very powerful machine learning, cloud-based, essentially visual analysis tools of one kind or another. And there should be a standardized model for that. And to my knowledge, there is not. So that's an example where it could get better fairly quickly if they just focused on that.
Bernadette, anything to add real quick?
No, I think there may be differences at the people level, but I agree wholeheartedly with Eric. It's the digital tools, incompatibilities and miscommunications that are the root of their problems.
The silos are 100 times higher for sure. All right, well, unfortunately for me, we've come to an end here. I have lots and lots more questions, as does the community, but we'll have to call it a day. I really want to thank you all. This has been such a pleasure for me, an honor to be in a virtual room with all of you. Thank you for spending an hour and a half with us. There were a lot of people in this room. It was streaming on YouTube, and I think it was made a big impact. So unless there's anything else any of you wanted to say as a final note, I guess we'll thank you all again, and we'll sign off for today. Thank you.